Hello, I'm Katie Nickel, and I am an educator at the Ringling Museum. Today we're going to look at three very different works of art from the Ringling's collection. Each of the artworks we'll discuss address art in unique ways. Let's begin by writing our own definition of art. Pause the video here for 2 minutes to write down what art means to you. Art can be difficult to define because it takes on so many forms and purposes. Art can be useful, serving a social purpose, or maybe purely decorative, giving pleasure to those who view it. Art can be manipulated by governments to promote nationalism, or can be used by artist activists as a critique of their own times. At the end of this tour, we'll return to your definition to see how it may have evolved. Let's jump right in and begin by looking at an oil painting from the Western art canon. When we hear the word art or fine arts, people typically think of art that looks a little like this: a large, classical-style oil painting featuring predominantly white European people. This painting is by Flemish artist Peter Paul Rubens and was made around 1613. Rubens was a critically acclaimed painter in his own lifetime. Along with his workshop of students and helpers, he produced hundreds of works of art, and his paintings can be found in major art museums around the world. Rubens is considered a leading Baroque artist, and his work captures many of the characteristics that define the Baroque period: high drama, movement, and rich colors. Learning to look at art is an important skill. Not only will an ability to analyze works of art help you when you visit an art museum, which I should say makes for a very impressive first date, but it will also empower you to analyze visual data in all aspects of life, from political propaganda to marketing advertisements. Learning to look deeply at art also helps us reflect upon ourselves, creating personal meaning and enriching our lives. Let's take a moment to practice looking at art. Pause the video for 2 minutes to look in silence. Welcome back. 2 minutes is a long time to look quietly at anything, but it's a great way to practice observation skills. Discuss with a partner or write down independently on a piece of paper some of the things you noticed while you were silently looking. What stood out to you? What captured your attention? And what are you still curious about? As I looked, I noticed several things that I might have missed initially. I see two people, a man and a woman, seated in the center of the painting. I immediately noticed that the woman's dress is disheveled for no discernible reason, and I spent a lot of time looking to see if the artist Rubens gave a reason why her breast was exposed. I couldn't find any details in the painting that explained her dress, so I am assuming that Rubens is taking some creative liberties in painting an undressed woman to delight his male viewers. It's quite common in Western art for male artists to depict the female body in a sensual manner, simply for the enjoyment of the mostly male art patrons. I also noticed that both the man and the woman are busy looking at something in the distance, with the man reaching down to direct the woman's gaze. He seems to be holding a slate or a board, while the woman is holding a wreath of flowers. The flowers also made me think. I noticed the flowers in her arms are dull, almost impossible to make out clearly, yet the flowers in the vase, basket, and growing in the foreground are clear and made of brilliant colors. The contrast between the two types of flowers became more noticeable the longer I looked, and I spent the second half of my 2 minutes admiring the detail in the flowers on the vase. Taking time to slow down and look at an artwork can reveal many details that you might otherwise miss. The differences in the flowers is a detail I almost overlooked, but it's actually really important to the painting. This painting is a collaboration, with Peter Paul Rubens painting the two figures and the background, and fellow artist Ozias Baert painting the flowers on the right and bottom edges of the painting. What are some stylistic differences you notice between the flowers and the figures? Pause the video here to discuss or write your response. Which style do you prefer, Rubens or Baert? This painting is a friendly comparison between two artists, Peter Paul Rubens and Ozias Spirit, but there is another rivalry being shown in the painting. This painting tells the story of Pausias, an ancient Greek artist who is famous for his realistic paintings depicting natural splendor. He is shown here with his lover Glycera, who is often credited with inventing floral wreaths. Around the time Rubens and Baird were painting this painting, the story of Pausias and Glycera had come to represent the timeless rivalry between nature and art. Rubens and Baird seem to be asking us the question of which is more beautiful, Glycera's natural flower wreaths or Pausias's creative and vivid floral paintings. What do you think? Create a T-chart with nature on the left and art on the right. Pause the video here to fill in a few short arguments in favor of both nature and art. The painting Pausias and Glycera is an example of the Western canon of art. When we say the word art, most people will imagine something that looks a lot like this, but there is so much more to art. Our next work of art is also an object prized for its beauty, and when I say the words Chinese art, something like this might quickly spring to mind. This dish is made of blue and white patterned porcelain, which was likely first used in Iraq, but came to prominence later in the Ming Dynasty in 14th century China. Nowadays, we often associate blue and white patterns, particularly those that include plant life, with Chinese aesthetic design. Western aesthetics, meaning the appreciation of beauty, is still heavily inspired by blue and white patterns, cropping up in all aspects of modern life, from fashion to interior design to everyday objects such as pillows and cups. Pause the video for 2 minutes to look closely at this object. As you look, write a list of contemporary examples you can think of that borrow this style of ceramic glaze. This particular dish dates to the early 16th century, from the middle of the Ming Dynasty. It showcases many features we now associate with Chinese blue and white pottery, such as flowers, flowing vines, and a dragon. Pause the video here and write down what springs to mind when you think of dragons. What associations do you have with dragons in contemporary pop culture today? Dragons are common symbols used in Chinese art and are easily deciphered by our societies both then and now. Now thought to be symbols of luck and good fortune, including dragons on decorations would be to usher prosperity into your life, and they are common symbols during the New Year celebrations. This particular dragon is an imperial dragon with 5 claws on each arm. The Chinese emperor was said to be the dragon, or the true dragon, and emperors in the Ming Dynasty would wear dragons embroidered on their clothing, dine from plates like this one featuring dragons, and decorate their sumptuous palaces with dragon imagery. Dragons are divine, and emperors aligned themselves with this fantastic animal by claiming to be descended from dragons and surrounding themselves with the family ancestor. Though this dish is elegant, elaborately designed, and destined for the wealthy emperor's court, there is a noticeable flaw. The rim of the dish is chipped, but rather than tossing the plate away, it has been delicately repaired with gold. Choosing to repair broken dishes with gold is a way to both call attention to the flaw and celebrate the lived experience of this object. It is an example that though this dish is a utilitarian object by nature, it is treated as a fine work of art worthy of repair and preservation over the past 500 years. Good design is an important element of art, reminding us that art does not need to be purely decorative in order to be considered art. After all, this work of art found in a museum collection is, at the end of the day, a dish, a plate, whose design tells us it is meant to serve food. But the aesthetic qualities of lasting, good design also make this object a beautiful work of art that continues to inspire the designs of today. The next artist we are going to look at uses his art form as a way to explore historical themes with reverberating contemporary impacts beyond utilitarian or design aesthetics. American artist Sanford Biggers lives and works in Harlem. He often works with heirloom quilts, altering them by ripping, resewing, and painting. But these quilts are anything but randomly constructed. Biggers is interested in codes, and this quilt, Codex Quilt number 12 from the Constellation series, has several codes we can crack. Quilt making has a long history in American art, and this highly technical art form has impacted American history from the first European colonizers to history being made today. One historical use of quilts that has inspired Biggers is the 19th century Underground Railroad, a secret network for helping enslaved people escape to freedom. The Underground Railroad may have used quilts to send secret messages. Though some historians debate whether quilts were used as part of a secret code, it is commonly believed that stations or safe houses would use complicated patterns in quilts to signal they were safe places for self-liberated people traveling north to freedom, who were often accompanied by a guide known as a railroad conductor. Harriet Tubman was a celebrated railroad conductor, making the dangerous trip from slave-owning states to free states dozens of times. And she may have needed to decode quilts in order to identify safe houses as she helped free dozens of enslaved people. Take a moment and pause the video here for 2 minutes to look closely at this work of contemporary art. As you look, think about the legacy of Harriet Tubman and the bravery it took to be a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Guided reflection is a great way to look at art, helping us to focus our connection to the artwork in a meaningful way. The legacy of the Underground Railroad is only one of many layers of coded meaning Biggers has painted and sewn into this quilt. Harriet Tubman used the North Star to guide her perilous journeys. This quilt, which is part of the Constellation series, uses star chart imagery to evoke the connections between the celestial sphere and the plight of people traveling on the Underground Railroad. Biggers reuses many of his symbols and codes throughout his body of work. Another common symbol we find on this quilt is the lotus flower, but there is more than initially meets the eye. Biggers takes the lotus flower, a symbol of hope and revitalization in Buddhist tradition, and merges it with a more unsettling series of images. Repeated in each flower petal is a rendition of a historic slave ship diagram, showing captured and enslaved Africans crammed into the hull of a ship. Many did not survive the journey, and those who did faced a lifetime of oppression and degradation in the Americas. Biggers infuses two symbols, the historical slave ship and the lotus flower, to send a complex message to his viewers. What significance do you think this symbol might have for many different people as they view this quilt? Star charts, slave ships, and lotus flowers are just a few of the codes to crack in this contemporary work of art. And I invite you to research Sanford Biggers further to discover more about this quilt and his other works. I have one final code to leave with you before we move on to the end of the tour. Many of the quilts Sanford Biggers uses to create these poignant and charged series are donated to him by the descendants of slave owners. Pause the video here to reflect on this work of art and consider how Biggers is reclaiming the historical narrative through his artwork. Let's return to our original definition of art. Has your definition changed after learning more about these three objects? Art can be decorative, used to transmit a story, or spark a debate, as Pausias and Glycera has shown us. Art can also be functional, with good design prevailing in all aspects of our daily life, from fashion to tableware. Art can also be an act of social and historical commentary, as Sanford Biggers demonstrates by drawing on diverse materials, history, and activism when creating his quilts. Thank you for joining me on this tour of the Ringling Museum today. I enjoyed exploring art with you from many perspectives and definitions, and I leave you with this challenge. How can you use art to take a stand?